A widow who swore off marriage. A duke who overheard exactly what she thought of him. "I'd marry a farmer before I'd marry you," said in company behind his back with the door left open 3 inches. This is the story of what happened next. Ketterley Park, Wiltshire, October 1815. The rain had begun on the Thursday and showed no intention of stopping by the Saturday, which meant that 26 houseguests of varying degrees of reluctance were confined to the same set of rooms, and the social temperature had been climbing steadily since breakfast. Vivienne Forsyth, widow of Sir Edmund Forsyth and current occupant of the smallest acceptable guest room, stood at the window of the east corridor and watched the lawn dissolve into grey. She had been at Ketterley Park for 40 hours. She intended to leave in 36 more. She had been counting. She had arrived Thursday evening, when the light was already gone and the drive was slick, and the footman who took her trunk had the expression of a man who had been carrying trunks since mid-morning and was not yet finished. The invitation had come from Lady Alderton, her late husband's cousin by marriage, which made refusal complicated and attendance worse. Vivienne had arrived with a single trunk, a maid and a firm private resolution. She would be pleasant. She would be present at the required meals. She would avoid the card tables and the matchmaking and the inevitable conversations about whether she had considered remarrying, and she would leave on Monday morning with her composure intact. She had not counted on the rain. She had not counted on him. The sound of boots on marble reached her before the man did, a particular kind of step, unhurried and even, that suggested someone accustomed to having rooms clear ahead of them. Vivienne did not turn. The corridor was long enough that whoever it was might pass without incident. They did not pass. The footsteps stopped approximately 4 feet behind her. She felt rather than heard the presence settle, as one feels a change in barometric pressure. "The west lawn," said a voice, "is approximately 6 inches under water." She turned. He was taller than she had imagined from the descriptions she had collected over the past 2 seasons, descriptions offered freely and with varying degrees of accuracy by women who had all, at one point or another, considered whether the Duke of Blackmere might be persuaded to notice them. The descriptions had agreed on the height and the dark colouring and the general atmosphere of controlled remove. They had not adequately conveyed the quality of his attention, which was the sort that made one feel simultaneously observed and assessed. "I am aware," Vivienne said. "I have been watching it happen. Then you are better informed than Lord Alderton, who has just dispatched 3 footmen with sandbags." Optimistic. Futile. He moved to stand beside her at the window, not close, but close enough that she was aware of it, and they regarded the drowning lawn together for a moment in silence that was almost companionable, and not quite. "You are Lady Forsyth, I believe," he said. It was not quite a question. She turned to look at him properly. "I am, and you are—" She paused because she knew perfectly well who he was, and they both knew she knew, and there was a small pleasure in the pause. "You are the Duke of Blackmere, I think." "I am," he said. "Your Grace," she added fractionally late, with the composure of someone who has chosen the timing deliberately. The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the territory adjacent to one. "Lady Forsyth," he said. She had heard more elaborate introductions. She had never found one more effective. The window seat at the end of the corridor had been there long enough to acquire the particular dignity of furniture that has outlasted several generations of the family that commissioned it. It was upholstered in faded blue, positioned in a deep alcove, and faced east, which meant it caught the morning light in fine weather, and, in weather like this, offered an unimpeded view of misery. It was, Vivienne had already decided, the best seat in the house, being sufficiently removed from the drawing-room to constitute a retreat without technically constituting a withdrawal. She had discovered it on Friday morning. She discovered on Saturday afternoon that Blackmere had apparently made the same calculation. She was already seated with a novel when he rounded the corner, saw her and stopped. The pause lasted perhaps 2 seconds. "Lady Forsyth," he said. "Your Grace," she said without looking up from her page. Another pause. She turned the page. He sat down at the opposite end of the window seat, opened a letter from his coat pocket, and began to read. They remained there for 40 minutes in silence, that was, by the end of it, not uncomfortable. This was, Vivienne reflected, already more than she had expected from the weekend. The first dinner was the sort of affair that made Vivienne grateful for a good appetite and a thorough indifference to social performance. Lady Alderton had arranged the table with an optimism that the assembled guests did not entirely deserve, placing Vivienne between Mr. Harcastle, a pleasant man of 60 with an enthusiasm for drainage schemes, and a young cavalry officer who spent the soup course explaining at some length that he had nearly met Wellington. Across the table, and 3 seats to the left, Blackmere ate with the focused efficiency of a man who had attended enough dinners of this kind to treat them as a logistical problem rather than a social occasion. He spoke when spoken to. He did not initiate. He had the manner, Vivienne thought, of someone who had decided long ago that the energy required to perform warmth was not available in his budget and had arranged his face accordingly. Lady Alderton's niece, Miss Wyndham, 20, pretty and perfectly aware of both, was seated to Blackmere's right and was making her best effort. Blackmere responded to her questions with answers that were technically complete and practically discouraging. Miss Wyndham was not discouraged. She had evidently a high pain threshold. "I understand you have come from London, Your Grace," Miss Wyndham said, deploying the smile that had, by Vivienne's count, already worked on 3 other men at the table. "Yes," said Blackmere. "Was the road very dreadful?" "It was a road," said Blackmere, which was, Vivienne considered, technically an answer. The cavalry officer was now explaining that he had nearly met Wellington twice. Vivienne turned back to him with the attentive expression she had perfected during 7 years of marriage to a man who had felt strongly about drainage. She did not look at Blackmere again until the fish course, when she became aware by some peripheral mechanism she declined to examine that he was looking at her. She glanced across. He returned his gaze to his plate with the composure of someone who had not been caught doing anything. She was, she decided, imagining things. The gentlemen rejoined the ladies in the drawing room at 9, and Lady Alderton, with the confidence of a woman who has hosted country house parties for 30 years, immediately organized a round of charades. Vivienne accepted a cup of tea, positioned herself near the fireplace, and watched the proceedings with the specific enjoyment she reserved for spectacles in which she was not required to participate. Blackmere, she noted, had stationed himself at the opposite end of the room near the bookcase, with the transparent intention of being too usefully occupied with the titles to be recruited for charades. It was, she thought, a strategy she respected. Less obviously retreating than standing near a door, more defensible than claiming a headache. "You must join us, Lady Forsyth," said Lady Alderton, appearing at her elbow with the inexorable cheerfulness of a woman on a mission. "We need even numbers. I am quite content to watch." "Nonsense." Lady Alderton's hand closed around her arm with the gentle but absolute grip of a woman who has heard that excuse before. "Mr. Pembleton needs a partner for the second round." Mr. Pembleton was 35, amiable, recently widowed, and had been looking at Vivienne since dinner in a way that suggested Lady Alderton had not arranged this partnership by accident. Vivienne surrendered her teacup and went. She passed the bookcase on her way. Blackmere did not look up from the titles, but she was close enough to see the faint line at the corner of his mouth that might, under different lighting, have been the beginning of something. "Coward," she said very quietly as she passed. He turned a page. "Tactician," he said to the bookcase. She walked on before she could respond to what had, without any question, been a smile. Charades lasted an hour and a half and confirmed Vivienne's privately held view that most social games were designed to extract maximum embarrassment from people who would rather be doing almost anything else. Mr. Pembleton was earnest, and not without charm, and he held her elbow very gently when she stepped down from the makeshift stage, which was kind, and also, she thought, not entirely spontaneous. Blackmere had been recruited for the 3rd round despite his best efforts. He played with the cold efficiency of someone who intended to win and did not particularly care what anyone thought of his methods. He won. His partner, the cavalry officer, was thrilled. Blackmere returned to the bookcase. "You might have looked pleased," said Vivienne, who had somehow ended up near the bookcase again and was not going to examine why. "I was pleased," Blackmere said. "This is what it looks like." She looked at him. "That's alarming," she said. "I'm told," he said, quite without inflection, "that one adjusts." She laughed. It was brief and involuntary, and she covered it with a cough, but she saw again that line at the corner of his mouth, and this time it was less ambiguous. Lady Alderton's gaze from across the room landed on them both with the warm precision of a woman who has just revised her weekend's plans. Vivienne took her leave shortly after and went upstairs to bed. where she lay in the dark and thought about nothing in particular for a long time before she went to sleep. The rain was still falling at 7 o'clock on Sunday morning when Vivienne came downstairs in search of tea and solitude, in that order. She found the breakfast room empty except for a footman, who provided the tea with admirable efficiency, and then disappeared. She took her cup to the window seat in the corridor, her window seat, as she had begun privately to think of it, with the slight territorial feeling one develops toward any retreat that has proven reliably quiet. It was occupied. Blackmere sat at the east end with a cup of coffee and a sheaf of papers, his coat abandoned on the cushion beside him, his cravat slightly less immaculate than it had been at dinner. He was reading something that had, by the quality of his attention, made him forget entirely that he was in a house full of people. He looked up when she stopped in the doorway. The moment lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then, "Lady Forsyth," he said. "Your Grace." She did not retreat. She walked to the window seat and sat at the opposite end, which she had already established as her end, and poured more tea from the small pot she had brought with her. He returned to his papers. She looked at the rain. The lawn had not improved. After approximately 10 minutes, she said, "Is it very bad news?" "I beg your pardon?" "Whatever you're reading. You've been frowning at it since I sat down." He looked at the paper in his hand as if newly aware of it. "My steward," he said, "believes that the North Drainage Channel requires immediate attention, or we will lose 40 acres of winter wheat." "That is, in fact, bad news." "Yes," he set the paper down. "Do you know anything about drainage?" She looked at him. He appeared entirely serious. "As it happens," she said, "I spent 7 years married to a man who knew a great deal about it. Some of it was absorbed against my will." The corner of his mouth moved. "And?" "You should attend to the North Channel," she said. 40 acres of winter wheat is not a thing you recover from in one season." He looked at her for a moment in a way that had nothing to do with drainage. "No," he said, "it isn't." She turned back to the window. Outside, a brave sparrow was attempting the lawn and reconsidering. "Why did you come?" she asked. "To Ketterley Park?" "Yes." "Lady Alderton is a friend of my mother's," he said. "I was persuaded." "By your mother?" "By the path of least resistance," he said, "which is not always the same thing but frequently serves the same purpose." "I was persuaded by guilt," Vivienne said. "Lady Alderton is a connection of my late husband's, and she has been very kind since his death, and I could not find a refusal that didn't make me feel small." He was quiet for a moment, then, "When did he die?" 3 years ago, quietly in his bed, which was very like him." She paused. "He was a good man, not exciting, but good. I was fond of him." "That is more than most people manage." She looked at him. It was not, she decided, a rehearsed observation. It had the quality of something said because it was true, rather than because it would land well. "Your wife," she said, because she might as well. "Dead these 5 years." His voice did not change. "Fever, it was very quick." "I'm sorry." "Yes," he said, the word had weight. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The sparrow gave up entirely. "You are," he said eventually. "Not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Lady Alderton's introductory letter described you as charming and accomplished, and in every way delightful." "How alarming." "I thought," he said, "that it would be a dull weekend." She set down her teacup. "And is it?" He looked out at the rain for a moment. "No," he said, "it isn't." The Sunday morning gathering in the drawing-room after breakfast had the atmosphere of a siege. 26 people who had now been confined together for 2 days and were beginning to develop the social attrition that comes from too much proximity and too little fresh air. Vivienne had positioned herself near the pianoforte, which had the advantage of being in a corner and therefore unapproachable from 3 sides. She was in conversation with Miss Wyndham, who had not, it transpired, given up on the question of the Duke and wished to discuss it. "He spoke to you this morning," Miss Wyndham said with the careful neutrality of someone who is not being casual. "At the window." "We were both in the corridor," Vivienne said. "He spoke to you for quite a long time." "We discussed drainage." Miss Wyndham blinked. "Drainage. He has concerns about his North Channel. It is, I believe, a legitimate agricultural anxiety." Miss Wyndham appeared to be reorganizing several assumptions simultaneously. "He is very—" She paused, searching. "He is very correct, isn't he? Very proper." "He seems so," Vivienne said. "Do you suppose he is always like that?" Vivienne thought of the line at the corner of his mouth, the single word, tactician addressed to a bookcase. "I have no idea," she said. Across the room, Blackmere was in conversation with Lord Alderton about something that required a map, which Lord Alderton was producing from a bureau with great enthusiasm. Blackmere was attending with the patient expression of a man who has learned to receive other people's enthusiasms without either sharing or extinguishing them. He did not look at her. She did not look at him. Mrs. Pembleton, the cavalry officer's mother, not to be confused with Mr. Pembleton, the recent widower, who was lurking near the sofa, arrived at Vivienne's elbow with the energy of a woman who has found a topic. "Lady Forsyth," she said, "I must ask, do you intend to remain at Silverton after Christmas? I only ask because I heard that Sir Edmund's brother has been making inquiries about the property." "He is welcome to inquire," Vivienne said. "Sir Edmund's will secured my jointure and the use of the dower house, and that arrangement is mine until I choose otherwise. Mr. Forsyth may inquire about the entailed estate as freely as he likes." Of course. I only wondered whether you had considered," Mrs. Pembleton's voice dropped confidingly, "whether you had considered the advantages of establishment. Of a new one, I mean. You are still young, and there are—" Her eyes made a brief, significant journey across the room. "There are those who would not be indifferent." Vivienne followed the direction of that glance. Mr. Pembleton, near the sofa, appeared to feel the weight of his mother's optimism and smiled across the room with the uncertain air of a man who has been conscripted into a plan he didn't entirely endorse. Vivienne smiled back with all the warmth she could manufacture and returned her gaze to Mrs. Pembleton. "You are very kind," she said, "but I have no intention of remarrying." "My dear, you say that now." "I have been saying it for 3 years," Vivienne said pleasantly. "I find I mean it rather consistently." Mrs. Pembleton opened her mouth. Vivienne, with the social dexterity of a woman who had spent 7 years navigating dinner parties, turned to Miss Wyndham and asked a question about Bath that kept the conversation usefully redirected for the next 10 minutes. She was aware, without quite knowing how, that Blackmere had moved. He was now nearer the fireplace. He was looking at the painting above the mantel with apparent interest. She did not think he had heard. The room was noisy enough. She put it out of her mind. The previous afternoon had brought an optimistic improvement in the weather. The rain thinned to a drizzle for approximately 90 minutes, and Lord Alderton organised a walk to the ruins of the old mill that sat at the edge of the north pasture, a quarter-mile from the house. 12 of the 26 guests elected to go, equipped with various degrees of appropriate footwear and enthusiasm. Vivienne went because the walls of the house had begun to feel like the walls of a drawing room, and she preferred mud to conversation. Blackmere had gone. She had noticed this, she had not remarked upon it. The path to the mill was narrow enough that the party naturally broke into pairs and small groups, shuffling and reshuffling as people slowed or quickened their pace. Vivienne walked with Miss Wyndham for the first half, and found herself, by the unremarkable alchemy of the path's curve, and a sudden surge ahead by the cavalry officer, walking beside Blackmere for the second. Neither of them acknowledged this. "The mill dates to about 1640, he said after a moment. "Do you know it?" "I've seen the records. Alderton mentioned it at dinner last year." He paused. "I was here last autumn as well. The weather was better." "You are a regular guest?" "An occasional one. His library is worth the journey." "What does he have?" He glanced at her. "Agricultural pamphlets mostly. Some navigation charts, a complete set of the philosophical transactions." "And you read the agricultural pamphlets?" "I read everything I can find on drainage," he said. "The North Channel has been a source of concern for some time." She laughed again, properly this time, not bothered to suppress it, and he looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, which was simply pleased. "You find drainage amusing," he said. "I find," she said, "that you are very consistent." They had reached the mill, which was a handsome ruin, roofless, mossy, the walls rising to different heights in a way that suggested picturesque collapse rather than structural failure. The party spread out across the grass to examine it with the various energies of tourists. Vivienne walked to the east wall, where a window opening framed the wet fields beyond. Blackmere followed, or appeared to follow. It was possible he had simply walked in the same direction independently, and she was not going to assume. They stood at the window opening. "In good weather," he said. "You can see the folly on the hill from here." "Is it a good folly?" "Adequate, Gothic, the usual pretensions." "Sir Edmund," she said, "had a folly. It was Grecian. He was very proud of it." "Were you fond of it?" I found it draughty. She paused. He was not a man who noticed draughts. A beat. My wife, Blackmere said, and then stopped. He started again. She was fond of follies. She collected prints of them. We had 17 in the library before. He stopped again, more briefly. Before. Vivienne did not offer a platitude. She looked at the wet fields. It is strange, she said, what they leave behind, what you find yourself still carrying. Yes, he said. One of the party called out behind them, and they both turned and the moment closed. On the walk back, the rain had returned with renewed commitment, and the party had hurried in a ragged line along the path with the general atmosphere of people who have made a mistake they are not willing to admit. Vivienne's half-boots had been doing their valiant best and failing. She had stepped in a puddle that turned out to be substantially deeper than it appeared. Blackmere, who was half a step behind her, had caught her elbow before she went down. It was a brief, efficient contact, 2 seconds at most, and then she had her footing and he had released her, and they continued walking as though nothing had occurred. Thank you, she said. Of course, he said. They had not spoken again until the house. The rain was gone entirely by Sunday mid-morning, which was received by the guests at Ketterley Park, with the unanimous relief of people who have been indoors together long enough to have learned things about each other they would rather not know. Vivienne walked along the east path that ran between the kitchen garden and the old yew hedge, which was quieter than the gravel drive, and went somewhere she had not yet been. It was cold enough that her breath showed, and the grass was still wet underfoot, and she had been walking 20 minutes before she admitted to herself that she was not so much walking as waiting to see whether something would follow. It did. She heard the footsteps at the bend in the path, that particular even rhythm, and kept her pace. Blackmere fell into step beside her without preamble, his hands clasped behind his back, his face turned toward the garden with the expression of a man taking air he requires. The Northfield, he said, is passable, if you want to see the folly. She glanced at him. I thought it was only adequate. It is, but the view from the ridge is not. She considered this. The folly was perhaps a mile. The morning was cold and clear, the grass still wet, and there was no earthly reason to walk a mile to look at an adequate Gothic folly, except that someone had asked her to. All right, she said. They turned north. The path climbed gradually through a stand of beeches that had gone entirely gold, their leaves dropping with the composed inevitability of things that have held on long enough. The wet ground muffled their steps. The world was very quiet. May I ask you something? Vivienne said, without it being a negotiation. You may ask me anything, he said. What did you think of me? Before the weekend, before you arrived? He was quiet for a moment. Lady Alderton's letter described you as charming and accomplished. You said that. I'm asking what you thought. He walked a few paces. I thought, he said, that you were probably managing, that widows of your position generally are, managing the property, managing the expectations, managing the story that is told about them, that you had very likely perfected a public self that cost you a great deal less than the private one, and that everyone you encountered was shown the public one as a matter of course. And now? He looked at her sideways. Now I think that was half right. Which half? The cost, he said, was correctly estimated. The direction was wrong. Your public self is not easier, it is sharper. The private one. He paused. The private one is considerably more unguarded than you intend. She looked at the path ahead. That is an unsettling observation. You asked for honesty. I asked for no negotiations, she said. The honesty was implied. The corner of his mouth. I stand corrected. The beeches thinned and the path opened onto a ridge, and he was right. The view was not adequate. It was remarkable. The whole of the valley spread below, the park, the lake, the village a mile further, the fields beyond it all in their wet autumn colors, brown and gold and the peculiar dark green of things that have survived a soaking. The folly stood at the far end of the ridge, small and Gothic and self-important, exactly as described. They stood at the top of the ridge and looked. Tell me something, Vivienne said. Something true that you have not told anyone this weekend. He was quiet long enough that she thought he would decline. I did not want to come, he said, which you know, but the reason... He paused. I have been finding it increasingly difficult to be in company, not unpleasant, difficult, as though everything requires more effort than it once did, and the effort is no longer offset. She turned to look at him. He was looking at the valley. Offset by what? By anything, he said. By interest. By the sense that the evening will produce something worth the attending. He paused. I came this weekend because I thought another house party in another house would be more or less identical to the previous ones, and I could survive it as I have survived the others. She waited. He looked at her. I was wrong about that, he said. The wind moved through the beech leaves above them, and she felt the warmth of what he had said land somewhere precise and undefended, and she made a conscious decision not to answer it yet, because if she answered it now, she would say something she was not prepared to mean. The Folly, she said. Yes, he said. They walked toward it. The Folly was, as advertised, Gothic and draughty, and not without a certain charm if one was willing to be generous. It had 2 pointed windows, and a stone bench, and a view north toward the hills, and it smelled of cold stone and old moss. Vivienne sat on the bench. Blackmere stood in the doorway with one shoulder against the frame, looking out. My wife, he said without preamble, would have loved this. He was quiet a moment. She would have sat exactly where you are sitting and told me to sketch it for her, because she couldn't sketch to save herself, but she liked to commission sketches of things she wanted to remember. He paused. I cannot sketch either. We used to argue about whose failing was worse. Whose was it? Hers, he said. Obviously. The commission is worse than the execution, but she could never be persuaded of it. The ghost of something moved across his face. She was the most cheerfully illogical person I have ever known. We were entirely unsuited. We were very happy. Vivienne looked at him for a long moment. You don't speak of her? No. Why? He turned from the doorway and sat at the other end of the stone bench and looked at his hands for a moment. Because speaking of her requires a face that I do not generally have available in company. And now? He looked at her. You are not company, he said, in the relevant sense. Her pulse made itself known. I was engaged once, she said. Before Edmund, I was 19. He was very handsome and very charming, and he told me I was the most extraordinary creature he had ever encountered, and I believed him utterly because I was 19. She paused. He married an earl's daughter the following spring. I was not devastated. I was embarrassed, which told me a great deal about what it had actually been. And Edmund? Edmund was 41 and sensible and very kind, and he asked me whether I liked the country, because he lived in it full time and felt I ought to know that before I decided. She smiled briefly. I liked him enormously from that moment. I was fond of him in the way one is fond of something steady, the way you are fond of a good chair. A good chair, he said. It sounds diminishing. It isn't meant to be. Fondness is— She searched for it. Fondness is underestimated. As a thing to build a life around, it is considerably more reliable than the alternative. He was looking at her carefully. What is the alternative one, he said. She met his gaze. The Folly was cold and the stone bench was uncomfortable, and the wind was doing something complicated with her hair, and she was very aware of exactly how close the other end of the bench was. Something less manageable, she said. A beat, too. Yes, he said, I know. They walked back in a silence that had changed its quality since the walk up. It was still comfortable, more comfortable in fact, but it had the density of something that has been said and cannot be unsaid, even though nothing very explicit had been said at all. The beeches were still gold, the valley was still spread below. The house, when it came into view, had the slightly unwelcome aspect of a world they were about to re-enter. At the edge of the kitchen garden, where the path divided, Vivienne stopped. I have no intention of remarrying, she said. I have said it for 3 years, and I mean it now as much as I meant it then. She held his gaze. I want to be clear about that. He looked at her steadily. You are being very clear. I am being clear, she said, because I would not have you misunderstand the terms. A pause. And what are the terms? He said. She opened her mouth and found she did not have a satisfactory answer. I'm not certain, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Neither am I, he said, but I am finding I don't mind not being certain, which is new. She looked at him. He looked at her. The kitchen garden smelled of wet earth and dying lavender, and the house was 50 yards away and full of people. Come and find me this afternoon, he said. It was not quite a request. She looked at him a moment longer. Perhaps, she said. She walked toward the house. She did not look back. She did not need to. The afternoon had the particular social energy of a house party. in its penultimate day. People conscious that the evening was the last full one and conducting themselves accordingly. There was a card game in the library. There was tea at 3 with a cake Lord Alderton appeared personally proud of, though he had certainly not made it. There was a musical performance proposed by Miss Wyndham and received with the varied enthusiasm of a group that has already spent 2.5 days in one another's company. Vivienne played cards, lost deliberately, and extracted herself at 4 o'clock. The window seat was empty. She sat. The afternoon light was doing something extraordinary with the copper beeches at the garden's edge, the last of the direct sun catching them at an angle that made the leaves look lit from within rather than by anything outside them. She had been there perhaps 10 minutes when she heard the step. She did not look up. He sat at his end of the bench, his end, she had begun thinking of it, which was its own kind of admission, and said nothing. She said nothing. The beeches held the light. "I have been thinking," he said, "about what you said, about the terms." "And?" "I think," he said, "that you are very afraid." She turned to look at him. He met her gaze without apology. "That is a bold thing to say," she said. "You asked for honesty this morning." "I asked for honesty about the folly view." "So you asked," he said with the patient precision of a man who remembers things exactly, "for something true that I had not told anyone this weekend. I have been extending the courtesy." She held his gaze. "I am not afraid. You declared yourself publicly," he said, 3 years ago. Never remarrying. Said it enough times that it became a part of what you are. And now," he paused, "now you are in a position where reconsidering it would require you to contradict yourself in front of everyone who heard you say it, and that is—" he looked out the window. "That is the specific kind of difficulty that has nothing to do with the actual question." She was quiet. "The actual question," she said. "Whether you want to," he said. "Not whether you said you wouldn't." The window seat held them both in the deep alcove of it, the light fading from gold to grey outside, the corridor empty in both directions. She felt something shift in her chest, not dramatically, not with any fanfare, but with the irrevocable quality of things that move by small degrees until they have moved entirely. "What do you want?" she said. He looked at her, directly and without the remove, without the careful management, with the face he had told her he did not generally have available in company. "More time," he said, "to begin with." She held that. "That is a modest ambition," she said, "for a duke." "I am working," he said, "within the stated terms." She looked at him, he looked back. The light was going. "More time," she said slowly. "To begin with," he said. They sat until the corridor grew dark, and a housemaid came to light the wall sconce at the far end, which was signal enough that dinner would be called within the hour. Vivienne rose. He rose with her. "This evening," she said. "Yes," he said. She went upstairs to change, and neither of them said anything further, and nothing was resolved, and everything was slightly different than it had been that morning. Sunday dinner was the last full meal of the party, and it had the energy of a final act. People more themselves than they had been on Friday, the social performances loosened by 2 days of proximity, the wine doing its quiet editorial work on everyone's reserve. Vivienne was seated between Miss Wyndham and Colonel Farr, a man of 50 who had been at Waterloo that very June and had been dining on it ever since. He had barely had 4 months in which to refine the account, but he had applied himself with considerable dedication. Vivienne attended to the routing of the Imperial Guard with the patience she had developed over years of dinners with men who had found their subject. Blackmere was at the far end of the table, in conversation with Lord Alderton. She did not look at him. She had made a decision, somewhere between the folly and the window seat, to be more careful, which was not the same as being less aware, and she was aware that she was not succeeding at either. She had spoken to him for perhaps 5 hours across 3 days. He had caught her elbow in the rain. He had sat beside her in a draughty folly and told her she was not company in the relevant sense. These were not significant events. She attended to Colonel Farr. After dinner, the women gathered in the yellow sitting room. The fire had been built up to an aggressive warmth, and Vivienne, who had positioned herself near the window with her coffee, had left the door slightly ajar to let some of the heat out into the corridor. The east corridor ran past this room on its way to the window seat. She knew its geography now, with the particular familiarity of someone who has used a place long enough to stop thinking about it. She was not thinking about the door when she said what she said. She was thinking about Mrs. Harcastle, who had been circling the topic of eligible gentlemen for the past 10 minutes, with the patient determination of a woman who considers this a service she performs for society. Miss Wyndham had drifted to Vivienne's side during Mrs. Hardcastle's opening remarks, drawn by the same instinct for self-preservation. "He is very correct," Miss Wyndham said in an undertone. She meant Blackmere. She had been meaning Blackmere since Friday. "He is reserved," Vivienne said. "Mrs. Hardcastle says—" "Mrs. Hardcastle," Vivienne said, "has not spoken to him since we arrived." "You are defending him again." "I am questioning the methodology." Mrs. Hardcastle herself had arrived at Vivienne's elbow, having concluded her circuit of the room with the decisive energy of a woman who has identified her destination. "Lady Forsyth," she said, settling into the chair beside them with the comfortable authority of someone claiming territory, "I have been meaning to ask, Sir Edmund's brother, I understand he has been making inquiries about the Silverton property." "He is welcome to inquire," Vivienne said. "Sir Edmund's will secured my jointure and the use of the dower house. Mr. Forsyth may have the entailed estate with my blessing." Of course. But you have been very comfortable at Silverton, and one wonders—" Mrs. Hardcastle's voice dropped a register, which meant she was about to say something she considered a kindness. "One wonders whether you have given any thought to a more permanent establishment. You are young still and well regarded, and there are gentlemen present this weekend who are not—" She paused with the weight of a woman selecting her words carefully. "Who are not indifferent." Her eyes made the small, inevitable journey across the room. Vivienne did not follow the glance. "You are very kind," she said, "but I have no intention of remarrying. My dear, you said the same thing last spring." "And the spring before that," Vivienne said pleasantly. "I find I am consistent." "Consistency," said Mrs. Hardcastle, with the gentle authority of a woman twice widowed and twice remarried, "is a quality one values rather differently at 30 than at 22. "I am 28, Vivienne said. "I value it exactly as I did at 25. "But surely—" Mrs. Hardcastle leaned fractionally forward. "Surely you must see that a connection of that kind, another glance less subtle than the first, would be of material benefit, not financially, of course, in your case, but a title, a position." "Mrs. Hardcastle," Vivienne kept her voice pleasant, which took more effort than it usually did, "if I were to consider every eligible gentleman in England and rank them in order of my personal preference, I believe I would sooner marry a farmer than marry a duke." There was a brief startled pause from Miss Wyndham, who turned it immediately into a cough. "A farmer," said Mrs. Hardcastle. "They have useful skills," said Vivienne, "and considerably fewer expectations." The room laughed, softly, warmly, in the way that drawing rooms laugh when someone has said exactly the right thing in exactly the right tone. Vivienne accepted a refilled coffee cup from a passing footman and felt the pleasant relief of a conversation that had been closed cleanly. She had not been thinking about the door. She thought about it now. The door to the yellow sitting room stood open 3 inches into the east corridor. She had left it open herself not half an hour since for the air. The room was warm and the corridor was not, and the gap was wide enough to let the heat breathe out, and, it now became apparent, wide enough to carry sound in the other direction, with considerably more fidelity than she had considered. In the corridor, barely visible through the gap, stood Blackmere. He was not lurking. He had stepped out of the dining room as the port concluded, as men sometimes did, to take a moment in the corridor before the company reassembled. He had been walking in the direction of the drawing room when the laughter from the yellow sitting room reached him through the gap she had left in the door. He had stopped. He was close enough to the door, not pressed against it, simply standing in a corridor that happened to run directly past it, that what she had said in a clear, pleasant, carrying voice to a room that had laughed in response would have reached him without difficulty. He looked up. He met her eyes through the 3 inches of open door. 1 second, 2. Then he moved away down the corridor, unhurried, with the even step she had learned to recognize before she could see him, and the footsteps faded toward the drawing room. The room continued around her. Miss Wyndham was telling someone about Bath. Colonel Farr had found a new audience. Mrs. Hardcastle was explaining something near the fire with great authority and no apparent awareness that anything had occurred. Vivienne set down her coffee cup. She had not said his name. She had not needed to. There was exactly one duke in the house, and she had spent 3 days making that fact increasingly legible to anyone paying attention. She could go to him. She could say, what? That she had not meant him. She had meant him, that she had not known he would hear, true and useless, that it was a joke. He would know that too. She did not go to him. The evening passed with the slow insistence of evenings that have not yet arrived at their point, and at 10 o'clock Vivienne excused herself and went upstairs to the small acceptable guest room, where she sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her reflection in the mirror above the dressing table, and found it not particularly informative. She had said what she said. She had meant it when she said it. She had meant every word, and the words were true. She had no intention of remarrying. She had said so publicly and repeatedly for 3 years. She had no reason to regret the statement. She was regretting the statement. Monday arrived with the particular clarity that follows rain. The sky swept clean, the garden still wet and glittering, the air sharp enough to make the lungs aware of themselves. It was a beautiful morning, and it meant departure, which was a combination Vivienne had always found faintly accusatory. She came downstairs earlier than usual, in the flat grey before the household had fully assembled, and found the breakfast room half empty. The earliest risers had come and gone. The late ones had not yet appeared. Blackmere was at the table. He rose when she entered, because he always would, and inclined his head in the precise degree and said, "Lady Forsyth," in exactly the tone he had used when they had first spoken. She said, "Your Grace," and took the chair nearest the tea and poured with the steady hand of a woman who has decided to be steady. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. He returned to his plate. She looked at the rack of toast and found she was not hungry. "I owe you an apology," she said. He set down his fork. He looked at her with the particular attention he had that made one feel very clearly seen. "For what?" he said. "You know for what?" A pause, precise and exact. "I don't believe you said anything that requires an apology." "I said something unkind." "So you said something that was," he said, "your honest opinion." He picked up his fork again. "I would rather have honesty than the alternative." She looked at him. He was cutting toast with the unhurried focus of a man applying himself to toast and not to anything else at all. "You heard," she said. "The door was not fully closed," he said, "and I had stepped into the corridor for air." "I didn't know." "I know you didn't." He paused, "which is, I think, the relevant fact." She put down the teapot. "I meant," she said carefully, "that I have no wish to remarry. I said it badly. I was deflecting a conversation that had become inconvenient." She paused. "I should not have used the category as a weapon." He looked at her again with that quality of attention that she had decided, over the past 3 days, was not coldness but its opposite, a kind of complete stillness that meant he was actually listening. "The category," he said. "Dukes," she said, since there was no point being delicate about it. "Ah," he returned to the toast. "In that case I should tell you that I found the farmer defense entirely sound. They have," he said, with the careful inflection of a man delivering a line he has prepared and is choosing to offer with neutrality, "useful skills." She stared at him. The corner of his mouth was doing the thing it did. "You are repeating my own words to me," she said. "I am agreeing with them," he said, "in principle." She picked up the teapot again and poured her tea with the slightly excessive concentration of a woman maintaining control of her expression. "You are a very strange man," she said. "So I have been told," he said. "By whom?" He considered. "My secretary, my steward, my mother on at least 6 occasions." "Your mother seems perceptive." "She is alarming," he said. "It is not always the same thing." She laughed. He watched her laugh with an expression that was not quite readable, not the controlled remove he wore in company, but something quieter and more private and considerably more dangerous. She stopped laughing. "Your Grace," she said. "Lady Forsyth," he said. "A moment." "The window seat," she said. "This morning I saw you weren't there." "I was here," he said. "Yes, when she turned her cup in its saucer. I noticed." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I thought," he said, with the careful deliberation of a man who has decided to say a thing and is saying it precisely, "that you might prefer it this morning." She looked at him. "Why?" she said. He looked back at her steadily. "Because you would want to decide," he said, "whether to come and find me or not." The breakfast room was quiet. A fire burned in the grate. Somewhere in the house a door opened and closed. "And if I had not come down," she said. "Then I would have understood," he said, "that you had made your decision." She held his gaze for a moment that was longer than it should have been. "I came down," she said. "Yes," he said, "you did." He returned to his toast. She drank her tea. Outside, the morning held its cold brightness with the composure of something that has nothing to apologize for. The house assembled itself in the way that houses do on departure days. Carriages called for, trunks carried down, the particular social choreography of 26 people all leaving by noon, and none of them wishing to be the first to begin the farewells. Vivienne's trunk was already with her maid. She had confirmed with Lady Alderton, who had pressed her hand with the warm approval of a woman whose weekend had exceeded her expectations, that she would be away before midday. She did not ask what specifically had exceeded them. She went to the east corridor. The window seat was empty. She sat because she had 3/4 of an hour before her carriage, and because this was her retreat and she intended to use it, and because she was not going to search the house for him. He knew where she sat. If he came, he came. The garden was very bright. The copper beeches had lost half their leaves overnight, and they lay across the lawn in their copper quantities, and the sky above was the specific blue that only happens in October, when the rain has finally relented and the light comes back clean. She heard the step at the 20-minute mark. He sat. They looked at the garden. "Your carriage," he said. 3/4 of an hour, she said. "Mine is ordered for noon." A pause. "Your North Channel," she said. "Will you attend to it this week?" "My steward will," he said. "I expect to be in London until Thursday." London? She was going to Silverton. Wiltshire and London were not the same direction. "I have a sister in London," she said, which was true, and also she recognized it as she said it. A piece of information she was offering him with a specific intention. "Does she receive?" he said. "Every Tuesday." He looked at the garden. She looked at the garden. A crow landed in the copper beech with the decisiveness of a bird that knows exactly where it is going. "I have no particular engagements on Tuesday," he said. Her heart did something brief and inconvenient. "My sister," she said carefully, "would be very pleased to receive the Duke of Blackmere." "And Lady Forsyth," he said. She turned to look at him. He was looking at her with the face she had now seen 3 times, the private one, the real one, the one that cost him something to show. And it was, she thought, the most dangerous face she had ever encountered, because it was not performing anything. It was simply present. "Lady Forsyth," she said, "would not be displeased." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat, produced a small card and held it out to her. His address, London. She took it. Their fingers did not quite touch, and then they did. Just for a moment, the briefest contact, his hand warm against hers in the cool of the corridor. And it was nothing. It was a calling card. It was a piece of paper passing between 2 people who had spoken for approximately 6 hours, across 3 days in the rain. She put the card in her pocket. "Tuesday," she said. "Tuesday," he said. They sat for another 1/4 of an hour in the window seat, the October garden going gold below them, and did not speak again, and it was the most comfortable silence she had experienced in recent memory. When her maid appeared at the end of the corridor to indicate that the carriage was ready, Vivienne rose. He rose with her. He said nothing. She said nothing. There was nothing that needed to be said, which was, she thought, its own kind of statement. She walked toward the stairs. At the turn of the corridor, she did not look back. She did not need to. She already knew he was still standing there. 3 weeks passed. She went to London on the Saturday before the Tuesday, staying with her sister Charlotte in Grosvenor Street. Charlotte was 3 years older, married to a good-natured baronet, and possessed of an instinct for subtext that made her both an excellent confidant and an occasionally alarming one. "You're different," Charlotte said over dinner on Sunday evening. "I am exactly the same," said Vivienne. "You're looking at the door," Charlotte said. "I am looking at nothing." "You've looked at the door 4 times since the soup arrived." Charlotte set down her fork. "What happens on Tuesday?" Vivienne took a sip of wine. "I have no idea what you mean." Charlotte smiled with the particular patience of a woman who has known someone for 33 years. "All right," she said. "More soup?" He arrived on Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Charlotte received him in the drawing-room, making the introductions with the warmth and ease of a woman practiced in the art of the comfortable receiving room. The fire was well built. Her housekeeper, Mrs. Alton, a compact, grey-haired woman of great discretion, moved quietly through the room with the tea things and then settled herself near the window with her mending basket, present as propriety required and unobtrusive as good sense recommended. Blackmere spoke with Charlotte about her husband's involvement in the improvement of the Islington Road with genuine interest that Vivienne, watching from the sofa, recognized as authentic rather than performed. He looked at her 3 times in the first 10 minutes. Charlotte noticed this. Vivienne noticed Charlotte notice it. Charlotte offered more tea with the serenity of a woman who intends to remember every detail. After 40 minutes, Charlotte was called away by a domestic matter, with a timing that Vivienne considered slightly suspicious. Mrs. Alton remained near the window with her mending, her needle moving with soft precision. Vivienne was aware of this fact and grateful for it. It meant the visit retained its correct form, even as it became, in some essential quality, entirely different. Blackmere moved to the near chair with the unhurried deliberation of a man who has decided something. "You came to London," he said. "My sister invited me," she said. "Your sister invited you in time for Tuesday. She is very well organized," Vivienne said. He looked at her steadily. "How are you?" he said. It was such a simple question. She had been asked it 100 times and answered it automatically. "Very well, and you?" "Quite well, thank you." And she had the automatic answer ready, and then she looked at him, and the automatic answer was simply not available. "Unsettled," she said. "By what?" "By the fact," she said, "that I have thought about that window seat every day for 3 weeks, which is—" She paused. "Which is inconvenient." He was quiet a moment. Then, "I have walked past my own correspondence 3 mornings running," he said, "because I was thinking about something else." "What something else?" "A question you asked me," he said. "At the Folly, what do I want?" He looked at his hands for a moment. "I have not had occasion to want things. Specific things, not dukedom things. For some time. It required more consideration than I expected." She held very still. "And?" she said. He looked at her. "I want to know what you think about things," he said. "I want to argue with you about follies and drainage and the precise definition of adequate. I want—" He stopped. Started again, more carefully. "I want more window seats." The drawing room was quiet. The fire burned. From somewhere in the house came the distant sound of Charlotte directing domestic operations with great energy. "I told you," Vivienne said. "I have no intention of remarrying." "I know," he said. "I meant it." "I know," he said again. "I'm not asking you to reconsider it today." He held her gaze. "I'm asking you to let me take you driving in the park on Thursday, and to call on Tuesday next week, and the week after." His voice was even and exact. "I'm asking you to give me the time that it takes for you to decide whether the thing you said 3 years ago is still true." She looked at him for a long moment. "That is very patient," she said. "I have," he said, "a great deal of patience for things that matter." The warmth of it moved through her cleanly, without fuss, the way sunlight moves through glass. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," he said. He left at 4. Charlotte reappeared within seconds of the door closing, with the promptness of someone who had been in the hall. "Well," she said. "Not a word," said Vivienne. Charlotte sat down and poured herself more tea. "He looked at you," she said, "the way people look at things they intend to keep." "Charlotte." "I am simply observing," her sister said, and drank her tea with great composure. Thursday came. The park was cold and the sky was the colour of pewter, and Blackmere's equipage was exactly what one would expect. Not showy, but unimpeachably correct. The horses very good. The groom at a distance that suggested discretion rather than inattention. He handed her up and they drove, and he let the horses set their own pace for a while in comfortable silence before he said, "You're thinking about the farmer comment again." She stared at him. "I am not." "You have that expression." "I have no such expression." "So you tilt your chin," he said with perfect composure, "approximately 3 degrees to the left when you are deciding whether to be embarrassed about something. That is not a real observation." "It is extremely accurate," he said. "I have had 3 weeks of letters to write and nothing interesting to look at, so I have been reviewing my memories of your various expressions with perhaps more attention than is strictly dignified." She looked at him. He was looking at the horses with the serene expression of a man who has said something true and intends to stand by it. "3 degrees to the left," she said. "Give or take," he said. She looked away at the grey park, at the other carriages moving through the grey afternoon. and felt something lift in her chest, something light and involuntary that she recognized, with a slight shock, as happiness. Not the steady warmth of fondness. Something quicker than that, something that was not manageable at all. "Your Grace," she said. He turned to look at her. "Vivienne," he said. She felt it in her spine. "That is the first time," she said, "that you have used my name." "Yes," he said. "You did it deliberately." "Everything I do," he said, with the quiet certainty that was the most characteristic thing about him, "is deliberate." She held his gaze. "Say it again," she said. "Vivienne," he said. It settled into her like a key turning. They drove on. November brought a quieter London than the season. The great houses reopened for private entertaining rather than the dense public calendar of spring, and the people in them conducted themselves with the slightly different energy of those who have chosen company rather than been obliged to it. There were dinners, small and well chosen. There were concerts in private drawing rooms. There was the particular intimacy of a city that has shed its obligatory social apparatus and retained only what it actually preferred. Vivienne was in company 3 or 4 evenings a week. Blackmere was in company 2 or 3 of those evenings. They were very correct about it, careful with proximity, careful with attention, careful in all the ways that people are careful when they are not quite certain what they are being careful about. He called every Tuesday without fail. He took her driving twice more in November, and once in early December when the cold was absolute, and she wore furs, and he said nothing about it but arranged the lap rug with a matter-of-fact attentiveness that was somehow more affecting than anything extravagant could have been. She began slowly and against her most determined intentions to rearrange her interior landscape around. This alarmed her. She arrived at Charlotte's one Wednesday morning in mid-December and said without preamble, "I have a problem." Charlotte put down her embroidery. "Yes," she said. "I have not asked you yet." "You have been about to ask me for 3 weeks," Charlotte said. "I have prepared several responses." She folded her hands. "Go on, then." Vivienne sat down and looked at the fire. "I said I would never remarry," she said. "You did." "I meant it." "I believe you did," Charlotte said. "At the time, I meant it for very good reasons. I was free for the first time in my adult life. I had my jointure and the dower house and nobody's opinion to manage but my own. I had said so publicly enough that it had become—" She paused. "It had become armor. And then—" "And then?" Charlotte said gently. "And then a very inconvenient person," Vivienne said. "Refused to be what I expected him to be." Charlotte was very quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are you asking me whether you should reconsider, or are you asking me how to make peace with the fact that you already have?" Vivienne looked at her sister. "The second one," she said. Charlotte picked up her embroidery again. "Then you are not actually in difficulty," she said. "You are in the uncomfortable position of being in advance of your own announcement." She glanced up. "Make the announcement. The rest follows." "It is not that simple." "It is," Charlotte said. "Approximately that simple." He came on Tuesday. Charlotte absented herself on some domestic errand of convenient timing, but Mrs. Alton settled near the window as she always did, her mending basket to hand, the fire bright, the room correctly appointed in all the ways that mattered. Vivienne had ceased to find her presence a constraint. She had come, in fact, to find it a kind of permission, evidence that everything occurring here was entirely above reproach, which left her free to attend to what was actually happening rather than to the appearance of it. He was on the near chair. She was on the sofa. They had been talking for half an hour about nothing in particular, a concert the previous Thursday, a pamphlet he had been sent on agricultural reform, a mutual acquaintance who had done something foolish at a private card party, with the easy rhythm of 2 people who have found their conversational pace and are content in it. She was watching him when he spoke, and she could see the moment he decided to stop talking about the pamphlet. His eyes changed, still composed, still exact, but with something behind them that was not going to be restrained much longer. "I have something to say," he said. "I know," she said. "You know." "You have been almost saying it," she said, "for approximately 3 weeks." He looked at her with the expression she had catalogued across 2 months now, the private one, the real one, and she felt, as she always did, the full weight of his attention as a thing that was given deliberately and not lightly. "I am in love with you," he said, simply, no ornamentation. She held it. I have said, she said carefully, that you were not asking me to reconsider. I said I was not asking you to reconsider on the day I called on your sister in October, he said. It is now December. I am reconsidering my position on the question. He held her gaze. I am in love with you. I have been for some time. I am telling you because I would rather you knew than not, and because I am done being patient about the knowing. She stood up. She moved to the window, the closest thing in the room to a window seat, and stood with her back to the glass, facing him. The light was low and December pale behind her. I have told everyone I would never do this, she said. I know. I have said it so many times that it has become part of what you are, he said. I know, I have thought about it considerably. And? He stood. He crossed the room, not quickly, nothing about him was ever done quickly, and stopped before her, close enough that she was entirely aware of the distance and what it meant. You are not what you said 3 years ago, he said. Neither am I. People are allowed to become different things than they announced. He paused. I am asking you to let what is true be true, even if it contradicts what you said before. Her throat was tight. What is true, she said, is that I have arranged my entire life around a declaration I made out of relief and pride, and very sound reasons that are no longer the whole picture. And the rest of the picture, he said. She looked at him. Directly, with the face she had discovered sometime in October, was the only one she had available when he was in the room. The rest of the picture, she said, is that I think about window seats. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, Vivienne. Yes, she said to his question, and to the one he hadn't asked yet. He took her hand, both of them there in the December light, Mrs. Alton's needle audible and entirely tactful in the window corner, and raised it and pressed his lips to it, and looked at her over it with the private face, the real one, the one she had fallen in love with in a draughty folly in October, without any intention whatsoever of doing so. When we are properly engaged, he said with the gravity of a man making a contract, I intend to be considerably less restrained. She felt warmth move up her throat. We are not yet properly engaged, she pointed out. No, he agreed. I am doing this correctly. He lowered her hand but did not release it, which is why I intend to call on you Thursday with a specific purpose and ask you a specific question. And if I say no, she said. He looked at her, the corner of his mouth. You are going to say yes, he said. That, she said, is a remarkable piece of arrogance. It is, he said, an accurate reading of the situation. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, because there was no point in performing uncertainty, she did not feel. Thursday, she said. Thursday, he said. He left at 4. Mrs. Alton folded her mending with the serene efficiency of a woman who has seen a great deal and will say very little. Charlotte, who materialized from the direction of the kitchen the moment the front door closed, sat down without being asked. He held your hand, she said. He was being respectful, Vivienne said. He was, Charlotte agreed, extremely. She poured herself tea. He's calling Thursday. Yes. With a specific purpose. Charlotte. I knew, her sister said with great satisfaction, from the soup course. He told me, Vivienne said. Charlotte paused in the act of lifting her cup. He told you I... Second Tuesday, Vivienne said, when I was fetching a book. Charlotte set her cup down. She had the expression of a woman revising her self-assessment as a person of discretion. He has, she said finally, a great deal of nerve. He does, said Vivienne with a warmth she made no effort to conceal. It is one of his better qualities. He came on Thursday at 2 o'clock, was received by Charlotte with all due ceremony, and was in the drawing-room with Vivienne for less than 10 minutes before Charlotte withdrew. Mrs. Alton was not present, which was Charlotte's judgment to make and which she had apparently made, and the drawing-room became, for this particular quarter of an hour, a room in which the ordinary rules of attendance were superseded by the understanding that some conversations require privacy to be conducted properly. He did not make a speech. He stood before her and said, I would like you to marry me. I am aware of what you have said. I'm asking anyway. She looked at her hands for a moment. I have been thinking, she said, about what I would lose. Tell me. The freedom of it, the not answering to anyone, my jointure, my dower house, the particular feeling of being the only authority in my own life. He nodded, he did not argue. And then, she said, I thought about what I would keep. He was very still. I would keep my own mind, she said. You have never suggested I would not. I would keep my opinions, which you appear to find useful rather than inconvenient. I would keep—" She paused. "I would keep the window seat if there is one." "There is a window seat," he said with absolute certainty, "in every house I own. I will build one in any that is lacking." She looked at him. "That is an extraordinary promise," she said. "It is an easy one," he said, "to keep." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I will not promise to be easy." "I have never asked for easy," he said. "I have asked for you." She felt the words settle into her, not with fanfare, not with the melodrama of the novels she had read at 19 and largely disbelieved, but with the quiet, particular warmth of something exactly right. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "Yes?" he said. "Yes," she said. "I will marry you. I will do it while reserving the right to be publicly embarrassed about the farmer comment for the rest of my natural life." "The farmer comment," he said, with the careful gravity of a man concealing a great deal of feeling, "will be engraved on my memory until I am in my grave." It was badly phrased. "It was," he said, "the most honest thing I have heard anyone say in recent memory. It told me that you were not performing, that whatever you said, you meant." He held her gaze. "That if you ever said yes to something, it would be because you had decided it. Not because you had been persuaded or maneuvered or had run out of excuses." A pause, warm and exact. "I have been waiting for that yes since October. I intend to take it very seriously." She looked at him a moment longer, then, "Come here," she said. He crossed to her, the last of the distance that had for 2 months been carefully maintained, and took both her hands in his and looked at her with the private face, the real one, the one she intended now to have available to her for the rest of her life. Then he kissed her, properly finally, with one hand at her jaw and the other at her side, and all the contained warmth of a man who has been patient for a very long time and is done with it. She felt the kiss move through her like the first day of spring. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, but the kind of warmth that reaches all the way in and does not leave. When he drew back, he looked at her with an expression that was simply entirely his. "I have," he said, "been very patient." "You have," she agreed, her voice not quite steady. "I intend," he said, "to be considerably less so going forward." "I am counting on it," she said. Lady Alderton received the news by letter on the Friday, and was, by all accounts, insufferable about it for the remainder of the year. Charlotte said she had known from the soup course, and said it to everyone she encountered, and showed no signs of stopping. Blackmere wrote to Vivienne's brother-in-law to ask formal permission, with a letter that was, when Vivienne's brother-in-law read it aloud at Christmas dinner, as he absolutely should not have, composed with such careful and precise feeling that even Colonel Farr, who had been retelling Waterloo to the dessert course, fell silent. The wedding was in March at the church near Ketterley Park, because Lady Alderton had suggested it, and neither of them had found a reason to refuse her. It was a fine morning, the kind of morning that arrives in March like a promissory note on spring, pale, cold, luminous, full of intention. They returned to Ketterley Park that same evening, being in the vicinity and the hour being late, and Lady Alderton's hospitality being, as always, impossible to refuse. The house was quiet. The other guests had gone. The fires were well built, and the rooms smelled of beeswax and wood smoke, and somewhere a clock ticked with the steady patience of furniture that has seen a great many things and expects to see a great many more. Vivienne went to the east corridor. The window seat was there, as it had always been, the faded blue upholstery, the deep alcove, the east-facing glass that was dark now, the night garden black and silver with late frost. She sat at her end. She heard the footstep, that particular even rhythm, unhurried, entirely familiar, and felt the warmth of it before he appeared. He sat at his end. They looked at the dark garden for a moment. "We began here," she said. "We did," he said. "I was looking at the rain." "The lawn was under water," he said. "I came to tell you." "You came," she said, "because you saw me standing here and wanted a reason." A pause. "Yes," he said. She turned to look at him. He was looking at her with the expression she had been given now for 5 months, the private face, the real one, and she knew it as well as she knew her own. "Vivienne," he said. "James," she said. His name. She had been saving it privately since November, had tried it quietly in her room like something she was learning to pronounce, and now she said it in the east corridor of Ketterley Park with the frost on the garden and the fire at the far end of the hall, and his expression did something she had never seen it do before, which was simply open. He reached across the faded blue cushion and took her hand. She let him. She turned her palm up. Outside, the frost held the garden in its white and precise grip. The copper beeches stood bare and silver against the night sky. The window held the dark. "We are going to be very happy," she said. She said it with the same certainty she brought to everything she meant. "Yes," he said, "we are." He raised her hand and pressed his lips to it again, the gesture that was becoming theirs, particular and known, and then he did not release it. She did not ask him to. The window seat held them both in its deep alcove, as it always had. The place where they had first found each other, and found each other again, and would, she thought, continue to find each other for as long as either of them had need of a quiet retreat and someone worth retreating to. Outside, the night was very still. Inside, not a word was spoken. Neither of them needed one.
Don't forget to like and subscribe, or at least leave a comment. Thanks for watching.